One really important message is something you just said there, which is you be you and I'll be me.
Yeah.
You know, what a great thing that is about your resilience. That's having the resilience to say, I'm going to lead my life the way I want to lead it with choice. And just because the herd happens to be heading in a particular direction does not mean that I need to be a part of that herd. And oftentimes, that's the very last thing that you need. The very last thing you need is to be going around with a way of thinking, a genre that's heading off in a direction. You go, that's not for me.
Yeah.
And if you get trapped into that, that's when your resilience becomes eroded. So that ability to just step back and say, hey, hang on. This is the lifestyle I want. This is the quality of life that I want. These are the relationships, the work, the fun. These are all the things that I want to pack into my life. And you've got to manage some downside risk in all of that, of course. I'm sure you did some things to manage your downside risk.
So welcome everybody to another Meet the Author. We've got a great conversation in store for you today and a wonderful guest. Gary, who do we have with us today?
Well, Tamara, I'm really pleased that we have Ian Snape with us today. Ian is co-author along with Mike Weeks of, I find, a really interesting, well-illustrated book. It's called Resilience by Design: How to Survive and Thrive in a Complex and Turbulent World. It is, I personally think it's so awesome. I bought copies for all my adult kids so they can share with my grandkids. It's that critical, I think, resilience. So welcome, Ian. And by the way, for those that know, Ian, what time is it right now for you?
It's 1 o'clock in the morning here in Tasmania.
1 o'clock in the morning. So thank you for joining us way down under. Appreciate that. And thank you for those who will be able to make it now and who will be joining us later. So let's dive right into it and ask that always first question. So what made you decide to write this book? Is there a need that you're trying to fulfill?
Yeah, and you know, if I'm flippant with your answer, let's look at the framing of the question where you said, what made you decide to write this book? And the short answer is nothing made me. It's cause and effect in that language that it permeates through our society, doesn't it? You know, what made you do this? And the short answer is, well, nothing made me do it. But the point is that a lot of people do feel like they are made to do things. They feel like the external world or external conversations with people make them respond in certain ways, particularly things like stress. You'll hear in every organization, oh, it's making me stressed, or he made me do this, or she made me do that. Or they, created this system and I'm stressed because of it. And it's all nonsense. It's all complete nonsense. I think when you see, I guess, people that I care about struggling with stress, with decision-making, with lives that they're in that they're not happy with, that was the motivation for me. I could see that. And my response was, well, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to create a company. I'm going to write a book. And, the people I'm talking about are, a lot of our clients are frontline professionals. They're in healthcare, they're police, they're correctional, in correctional services. They're in those sorts of jobs where people say, oh, they're stressful jobs. Well, hang on a minute. They're not stressful jobs. Some people respond with stress. Other people really love their work and they don't find it stressful. So I'm really curious about that distinction between those that do and those that don't. And how do we capture that distinction, that ability to not be stressed and to do resilience? And then how can we transfer that to everyday people, frontline professionals? We're from a company called Frontline Mind, but also everyday folks who might struggle with difficult situations, and they would like to learn how to experience the world differently, how to make better decisions, how to get out of lives that they find themselves in that are really not working for them.
Yeah, right. So the word resilience has bounced around, and I see there's different types of definitions. What definition are you using?
We talk about the ability to prepare So it can be what you can do ahead of time. It's about how you respond and how you adapt. And this can be anything from incremental changes to challenging or difficult situations, or right the way through to a catastrophe or a crisis or a major upheaval in your life. So it's very much about adaptation with some sort of continuous sense of identity. That's what we mean by resilience. Having something that perhaps causes you to experience, or having a situation that's so catastrophic that you no longer have a sense of identity, that's no longer resilience. There's something else going on there. That could be a company, for example. Take resilience and apply it to a company. If you've got some sort of connectivity of ideas and people, then that's resilience. If your whole company goes bust and you lose everything, that's no longer resilient. Then you might need to start again, just to use that as a metaphor.
Yeah, right. So who do you see as the audience for your book?
I think it can be anybody. I think ultimately, I guess it's people that buy books. I mean, I use that. I'm being kind of frivolous there, right? But it is written as a book. It's written as a coffee table book that you can luxuriate in. So it's people that will go, I actually really like that old school physical, I've got a book in my hand, right? It's somebody who's more interested in a book than they are a meme on Facebook that says, hey, this is how you do resilience in 45 characters and a cartoon. I wanted to provide something that was deep, that was connected to the literature, that was really well researched, and there was just a luxurious thing that you could open up at any time. You could dip in for 5 minutes and just read a story. You could skim it back and forth. You're attracted by the graphic design and the illustrations. So yeah, that's kind of where I was going. That's
good. Well, I'll say my kids are saying this is an awesome book, and we've got both ebook copy as well as the paper copy as well. So you're right. You're with my wife. She likes to have that smell of the book in her hands. So
yeah. I mean, I'm hoping it provides really practical tips and tricks, or just stimulates people's thinking so that they make decisions differently. Mm-hmm. And certainly I know you guys have got a particular lens around safety. The thinking behind this book and what we teach in really practical skills is about risk. Every decision you make in your life is about managing risk and taking chances and making that work for you. And this book is about, how do you do that? How do you engage with risky situations and manage that? We were talking earlier in the preamble about the unfortunate role of the regulator, right? And how poor regulation is at the moment, particularly in North America, and it's true the world over, where there's almost what I would call defensive decision making, right? We're resorting to checklists. We've got lots of bureaucracy. We've got lots of attempts to control rather than embracing emergent risk in very proactive ways. I think if I summarize the situation, and it actually makes things less safe, which is fascinating. They're trying really, really hard, and the harder they try, the more they try to control, the less well able they are to manage safety. And I think there's a paradox there. And this book is about how you kick out of that at a personal level. Later work that we're doing is about more systems and how you do that organizationally. But ultimately, it comes down to you. You can't blame your company for not looking after your safety, because you've got to look after your safety. And if you don't like what's going on there, you can either speak up or get out. But sitting there and getting wiped out is not a good option. So if we're blunt.
Yeah. I'd like your statement in the book where you say the challenge is to develop context appropriate states with an intensity that matches the needs of the moment. So we talk about being emergent. Well, there you go, right there.
Yeah, absolutely. There are common states that don't work well for people because they get applied out of context. So let's take stress as an example. If you have a stress response to something in the external world and you listen to that response and you go, hang on a minute, I've got something happening here. What's it telling me? What's the benefit of this? It can serve you really well. It might be the thing that's oh, hang on, I've got to stop right now. I've got to reassess my situation. I want to do something with this signal that I've got. I've got a stress, I'm stressed right now. But we don't do that. A lot of people don't do that. They keep going on and they just keep doing stress. They practice it, or they practice anxiety, or they practice anger. And all of these things, these emotional labels, these emotions that people talk about, in the right context, that can serve you really well if you've got a bit of it. We overdo it and then it amplifies because we're not listening, and you get really, really stressed and really, really angry or really, really anxious, or whatever state you choose to have. So we talk more about designing, pre-positioning, what kind of state is going to meet the context, how much of it do you need, and how do you recognize when the context has changed? And then how do you switch? How do you switch between being in a really high risk situation where you might need to be very, very vigilant, even hyper vigilant, to then switch and go home and go, actually, I don't need any of that right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, you've got a pretty interesting way that you arranged the book. Can you tell us more how you organized the book and the approach that you used?
Yeah, the book, the origins of the book really came about from what we call modeling. And what I mean by modeling is looking at the unconscious ways that amazing people around the world do resilience. So going right back, we started modeling people in frontline agencies, police, tactical, people in extreme risk environments like the mountains, like mountain guides of America or Alaska, New Zealand. And from there, we identified common patterns that people use. So let's say we train a group of people. It could be a team, could be 15 people. And we ask certain questions. And usually within the space of an hour or two, we'll uncover in the room about 80% of the patterns that we cover in this book. So people already have some latent use of the patterns in here. They'll talk about, oh, well, I took a step back. And then you unpack what they're doing, and they're doing third position, which is covered in chapter 5, right? Or somebody said, oh, I had a gut feeling about this, and I listened to that, and I knew that I shouldn't keep going. And you go, okay, well, there's chapter 7. So the structure then came about from hundreds of interviews with people who do resilience really well. And then we structured it in a reasonably logical way. There's a bit more theory at the front end and a bit more practical at the back end. So we sort of front loaded some of the neuroscience, some of what we know about the way that humans make sense of the world. And then built a book that would go, you can go front to back. You can actually go back to front if you like. You can dip in on a particular topic. But the really hard part of writing the book was every spread, as you open the book, is self-contained. So you can just read 2 pages and they should make coherent sense. There's a couple that are linked where there's actually 2 spreads required for it to fully join, but no more than that. So you can dip in 5 minutes and go, oh, I'm just going to be curious for a moment. And then you go, okay, now I've got to go and look after my kids or go to work or, get back into this meeting or whatever else you want to do. So it's designed to dip in, dip out, front to back, back to front. And yeah, I love that idea of, like I said, luxuriating on the coffee table because I'm old school.
Yeah, well, I think just to share with people and maybe get you to salivate, you've got a great graphic at the end talking about the box of chocolates. You've got 12 chapters and there's 12 different types of chocolates in there. So just as an aside, I did send your book to my daughter as a Mother's Day present. So I gave her a box of chocolates.
I love that metaphor. I love that. Beautiful connection.
It was good. Taro, I see you got your hand up. Would you like to add some comments?
Yeah, well, actually, more of a question. So, I personally do believe that being resilient is a personal choice. You know, when things come at you, you know, stepping back and looking at what really are my options and then choosing what is best for where I want to go. And we kind of discussed that in our pre-conversation in the green room. And it kind of struck me that, you know, you were talking about like the world kind of gives us this subscribed view of how we should be living our life. And a lot of people tend to be sheep and continue down that road. And then you've got a black sheep who says, no, you know, I'm going to quit my job and go live in Honduras for 4 or 5 years, right? And so I kind of wanted to dig in a little bit deeper about the narratives that are subscribed to us, and how is your recommendation about how to go about rewriting that narrative? Because I understand that I might have done it unconsciously, but I think there needs to be a conversation about how do we do that consciously.
Yeah, wow, that's actually a very deep question, because you're linking it to the conscious and unconscious. And one of the things that's it permeates right the way throughout the book, and we do make it explicit. I suspect we don't make it explicit enough. And that is, this book is about the and. This is not about, oh, is it conscious or unconscious? This is about how do we harmonize the conscious and the unconscious? How do we use both of those in our decision making? How do we use both of those in identifying what the sheep are doing? And am I just going along with the sheep because there's a pattern there? Am I entrained in what's going on in the thinking around me? Or in fact, have I stepped out of it? Am I able to see the patterns? And am I able to evaluate, is this working for me? And I think my personal view is you can do both with conscious and unconscious. We can pre-position decision-making by consciously practicing, so that unconsciously we have those new emergent patterns. Unconsciously, we can train ourselves to kick out and just do random things and shake it up. So I think there's actually lots to your question. My personal view is take stock of your life periodically. And this could be every 6 months. This could be quite regular. I'm not saying, go for 20 years and then stop and then say, hang on a minute, how's my life? I'm saying on a much more regular basis, let's just step back and say, how am I going with my relationships right now? Have I just been buried in work for 6 months and I've forgotten that I'm married and I've got 2 kids? Do they even know who I am? If I'm coming in after a 60-hour week, does the dog recognize me? Or is it asleep and it's like, oh yeah, that guy's here, whatever. Regularly take stock of your life, look at your lifestyle, and shake it up, do something different. Mike, my co-author, would be one of the most random people you could ever meet. He's the least sheep-like human I've ever encountered. He'll do any crazy thing if it's more interesting or there's some opportunity in it. So embrace a bit of randomness, I think.
Yeah. Does anybody else have a question? Because I do have a follow-up, but I want to give the room a chance to get in there. Do you, Peter? Go ahead.
Oh, unmute yourself, Peter. Yeah.
How's
there
that?
you go.
How's that?
You're better. Now.
Okay, good, thanks. I was just curious what your comment at the first there about the stress and how you manage it when you're at work. I'm sure a lot of people get their stress from their bosses, right? And so you may not have that stress yourself. You may be able to manage that on your own. But I think if we kind of really look at it, you get a lot of that stress pointed towards you, I guess, by other people. So I guess there's 2 ways of looking at how to manage that, right? Whether you manage the stress yourself, but you need to manage that stress, I guess, on the business side of it too, and work. So I guess there's 2 levels of stress. Would that make sense?
Let me play with the words there a little bit. You started with, you get your stress from your boss. All right. This book is about, you don't get your stress from your boss. Let me challenge that. Your boss might be stressed, and you've got the choice whether you take that on or not. And it's that distinction, the gap between what your boss is doing, what your workplace is doing, and what your response is to that. Now, I was really picky with your language, but this is the dominant language pattern in the world. This is not just a random pattern that I've picked up. You go anywhere and people talk about how my boss is making me stressed or my work is making me stressed. Well, it's not. You've got choice in there. Now, there's a really important point. Let's say that your boss is really stressy, right? They're not coping with their work, whatever it might be, and I think you use the word like they're projecting that at you. And then I think there's a few things you can do. You can step to the side. You can do a whole range of things so that stress doesn't come to you and you don't pick it up. You can observe it. You could even help your boss. You might be able to help them by saying, hey, here's what I'm observing. Here's the pattern I'm seeing. What can we do to work on this together so that you're not doing that? But let's say, for example, you've got the kind of boss that ain't interested in listening to that. They're stressed out of their brain. They're creating an environment that's not fun to be around. It's going to take you energy to be able to operate differently. It takes us energy sometimes to not copy the patterns around us. You've got to have a filter in place. Okay, so you need to be aware of our environment. And it might be that ultimately you choose not to be in that system because it's so energetic to keep that stuff out. And we talk about a toxic environment. And sometimes that's actually quite a good metaphor. It's like, I can survive in a toxic environment if I've got my suit on. But do I want to wear a suit every day in, day out? Do I want to work in a really toxic environment? And sometimes we might choose to. But if I'm going to work in a toxic environment, I'm going to have all the PPE in the world that I need. I'm going to be really well paid for it. And it's going to be for a short period of time. I'll go into a nuclear reactor if I've got the right kit and I'm not there very long and they pay me a very large amount of money, right? But I'm not going to stay there very long at all. So I hope that's a useful metaphor.
Yeah.
Michael.
Yeah.
Hey, Ian, thanks for staying up late for us on this side of the globe.
Oh, no, I got up. I've been to bed.
Oh, geez. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, it's a super early start. Well, maybe there's a little lead on to the question that was just posed, because another way of looking at it, well, I want to try pull a couple stories from your Arctic expeditions. It's a part of your life. I'm not sure if some of the attendees are fully aware. So the question is, and then I'll just want to make an association to the last question is, from all of your Arctic expeditions, what one or two stories are maybe a good exemplar of resilience in a certain environment, and maybe was there an example or a situation where you thought, oh, geez, now what how you distilled all this thinking in your book, that would have been helpful for the team or you to have. And I just want to relate to the question a little bit because, and I like how you frame things at the start. It's kind of like if I'm going out to, hike in the mountains, right, or taking the boat out onto a remote lake, if the weather turns on me suddenly, I need to deal with that. I'm caught in that situation. It's external to me, so I have to respond. So that's kind of like the boss that is, all of a sudden, pulling the schedule and amping up the demands in that moment. It's kind of like this storm that's hit. I'm in it. How do I deal with it so it's not, dumped on me?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I've had lots of experiences in polar research. I've led many expeditions. In my early days, I spent a lot of time helping people in the challenges of remote work. Very long expeditions, they're away from family for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, maybe even 18 months in a remote camp. And how do you be resilient in those situations? I can think of two stories that are interesting. We had a guy working in the Australian Antarctic program many years ago. His name's Rupert Summerson. He's shorter than me, really slightly built, very gentle, very quiet guy. And he was involved in mapping. Right, he was employed to do sort of He's in a data center. And people didn't realize that Rupert was about the toughest, most resilient human being I've met. He's ex-British Special Forces. And he did a lot of expeditions with some of the really big names, man-hauling across polar regions. And he's been written up in books where the iconic leaders are fighting, they're squabbling, they're struggling, and he's the peacemaker. He's just unflappable. This really quiet guy that nobody would assume was in any way tough or resilient is just incredible, inspirational. So there's one story that sometimes you see it, this resilience thing can be hidden in plain sight by the least assuming people. And then I have another story that sort of popped to mind as you asked that question. And I guess is a bit of a personal reflection. I was on the dive team in Antarctica. And as you can imagine, diving under ice in Antarctica is an incredible experience. It is beautiful. It's remote and it's dangerous. It is a dangerous thing to do. We have systems in place. We have tethers. We have surface supply of air. And I had a situation where I was a long way out. So I was about 100 meters from the dive hole. And we've got a topside crew there who are feeding out the hose, who are in communications. And I'm 100 meters under ice from safety. So if something goes wrong, you can't just come up. And our comms weren't great. They were a little bit shaky on that day. And I was out here and my air ran out. And I had a buddy with me. He was reasonably close, but when you're under ice, it's not like you're scuba diving in a warm environment where you can share air. It's much more difficult to do. It's minus 1.8. You're in freezing water. If you rip your mask off, your eyes are starting to freeze. The environment does not lend itself to you running out of air. And there I was. I ran out of air. And unfortunately, the guy was reasonably close and he could see me. And I gave the I'm out of air signal. And we have what's called a bailout bottle. And this is actually quite a small bottle. It's only, it's about that big. And there's only a few liters of air in there. And at 100 meters, when you've got all that gear on and you're trying to navigate your way back under this sort of iceberg-like terrain, it's quite challenging. So I started swimming back and I swam really slowly. And all the way, my narrative was, okay, you just need to relax here. This is about relaxation. You need to be so relaxed that your breathing is slow, that you're having just the amount of air that you need to just keep going. So I'm starting back, I'm really slowly going along with this very, very limited amount of air. And then I remember thinking, okay, what happens if you run out of your emergency air? And I remember saying to myself, it's really important that you just pass out. Don't take the mask off. I don't want seawater in my lungs. I don't want to be inhaling any of that stuff, right? So I said to myself, you just need to pass out and trust your topside crew. They'll eventually haul my body out, right? I'll be unconscious, but I'll still have this mask on. I might be unconscious, but no matter what happens, there's not going to be any panicking. They just need to haul my ass out of there and then they can revive me, right? But they're not going to be able to revive me if I'm gulping air in and I've got seawater that's, in my lungs. So I share that story of one of resilience because there's two things there. The situation required deep relaxation. It required a lot of preparation and it required trust in my external support network. It needed deep trust to the point where I was prepared to go unconscious and let them sort me out. And I needed to just stay relaxed and keep moving in the right direction. If I'd panicked at 100 meters out, I wouldn't be talking to you today.
Wow.
Incredible. Thanks for that.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me just take you back to the book. After that, let me refocus yourself. one of the chocolates you've got is chapter 2, and I think we touched upon it already. And you entitled this sense making and the importance of making sense of the situation. Can you just dive a bit deeper into that? What do we need to understand about sense making?
I think the essence of sense making is acknowledging that we're not like a camera that's able to just record what we're programmed to see, if that makes sense. We have evolved to detect patterns. So we don't notice a lot of what goes on around us, but instead we have evolved to detect patterns that pose a threat to us. That's part of our evolutionary history. So we don't see a lot of things in the world. Now, the upsides of pattern detection are that we're safe. We see patterns as they emerge in complex situations. And I use that word very, very deliberately. The downside is that we can miss stuff around us as we're responding to sense of threat, for example, or things that might be more obvious. So sense making then is about, well, okay, if I acknowledge that we're evolved to detect patterns, how can I use that to my advantage? How can I detect patterns sooner? How can I be aware of the patterns that are important to me? Or how do I detect patterns that might be novel, that I've not seen before, that have not yet fully emerged, that I can use or exploit? So that's the value of sense making and some of the underpinnings of it. I think it's super important. I think it's actually being situationally aware, and we use that word, situational awareness. It's about your ability to detect patterns and understand where they might be going and acknowledge that they're patterns. They're not a fixed cause and effect process in the world. They can change. You might have all the confidence you like in a particular pattern. It might be very stable, but if it involves humans or animals, for example, it's probably still a pattern, and you might need to be a little cautious about how far you might take that. I often use an example of Montecore the tiger from the Roy, the Las Vegas stage. They had this tiger, been on stage for 7 years, and everyone thought its patterns of behavior were predictable. And it was for 7 years until it bit Roy on the head one day, and that wasn't a great outcome for him. You've got to be alert to patterns and always keep a bit of a weather eye on what's going on over there. How's that pattern emerging? Let's stay alert. This is still a dangerous animal,
Yeah. Well, it really ties in well with your chapter 7, all about signals, right? Early detection. Can you tell us about how maybe we use signaling, or maybe we missed early signals?
I think paying attention to signals is quite possibly the most valuable thing you could learn. This can be in the safety space. This is your sensations that alert you to risk. Mm-hmm. It could be, a lot of people say, "Oh, I had a feeling in my gut." And we've conducted this interview with hundreds and hundreds of people who operate in really high risk environments, and often people say, "Oh, it's my gut," or "It's my I've got a feeling in the back of my neck," or "I've got a tension across my chest," or "It's my breathing, I can feel it here." And they'll often use words like heavy to signal that something's not right, that the answer's actually no. Shall I progress in my next course of action? And there'll be an involuntary movement backwards. Guess what? There's a signal. Unconsciously, quite often we can tell where somebody's going to go before they know that they're going to go there. So we're often signaling to others and to ourselves. And I expand on this with the notion of stress or anxiety. They are signals. Pain is usually a signal. It's usually a signal to get your attention, to say, "Hey, stop right now. I'm worried about what's going to happen to this limb." Pain is not a cause and effect because you've done some sort of damage to an area and there's a hardwired pathway, right? There is a brain that processes the pain signal and makes sense of it for you. And it's actually an alert. It's a danger signal. It's telling you danger, danger, danger. It's not saying, "Oh, you've just done this, carry on." it's actually alerting you. So all of these are signals, and learning to be able to recognize what's going on and respond appropriately is key, I think.
Yeah, right. Okay. Any comments, questions from anybody? Tanya,
Oh.
I see you've been very active in the chat panel. Want to share anything?
I don't know if I have anything to add. I love this kind of thing. I mean, there was one webinar that I was on a little while ago where it was said that we're all actually just meerkats. I mean, watch when the fire alarm is pulled. We're not self-directed. We will look around to see what everybody else is doing before we do anything, because we depend on other people to guide us in our choices. So this was before I knew that Omicron was a thing. We went to an in-person concert where, you know, everybody's, so this was in 2021, everybody's vaccine passports were a thing then. Everybody had to, you know, have masks and everything. And I can remember being in what I felt to be a very crowded hall. I had been in this hall many, many, many times, but for the first time I started to realize how many people that hall actually holds, and is there any ventilation in this place? But I watched people for standing ovations, and it was remarkable because I watched people, they were on the edge of their seat, but they'd look around. Is anybody else going to do this? And then they'd sit back down, or if they saw somebody else do it, then they'd stand up. And I thought, this is amazing. Like, you know, if you believe that the person deserves a standing ovation, then it doesn't matter what anybody else says. Give them a standing ovation. If you don't think they do, then don't. Like, you know, but it's not the way that most people live their lives. You know, they're very dependent on others and the way that they react to things in order to discern what choice they should make.
I think there's something really interesting in what you're saying there, that, and I'm gonna direct attention to a middle ground. And it's like this. I think sometimes it's really valuable to be the meerkat and detect the pattern and realize what the pattern's for. And it could be a cultural norm, like whether you're going to give a standing ovation or not. If you don't know the cultural norms in a concert about when it's appropriate to clap and when not, you might not know the piece of work and think it's finished when in fact it hasn't. You know, and you can deeply embarrass yourself by suddenly standing up and clapping, and everyone, you know, the 500 people are looking at you going, who's that idiot? Like, does he not know this piece? So, you know, there's an advantage to that. And then there's another part. And there's a post on LinkedIn about 2 months ago, and it was about a fire alarm in a hotel, and the response of I think a particular room, or the occupants of a room, who said, we're not going. So the staff in the hotel had to respond to the fire alarm, and they're evacuating everybody, right? And this one room, they just wouldn't answer. They put the people at risk. They put the staff at risk. They were rude. There were all sorts of issues reported in this article in LinkedIn. And as it turned out, it was a false alarm. But the hotel still had to do its procedure. And of course, all the staff did a really fantastic job, apart from having to deal with these idiots who just plain refused to get dressed and go out and follow the safety protocol. Now, I'm linking this in, right, because sometimes it really pays to not be a sheep and go with the flow, and sometimes it really pays to do that. And sometimes if you don't pay attention to what's going on and follow those cultural norms, there can be ramifications. So it's not a yes or a no. And it's about us constantly evolving and learning. So it's about us having that learning loop and saying, well, in this context, what's the right response? Is it that the wisdom of the crowd is actually quite wise? Or is it that the wisdom of the crowd are off on a tangent doing something really dumb that I'm just not going to follow? So you've got to have a learning loop, and you've got to use evidence to constantly train yourself to make better decisions, where you can both have good pattern detection, follow the crowd when the crowd's on the money, and step back and let them go when they're about to go over a cliff because they're idiots. So I hope that's I hope that's wrapped up where you were going there.
Yeah.
I guess I had a follow-up question to this, because I've been curious about this for a long time now. So maybe you can actually help answer this. Is, do we know why there's some people that you look at a situation, see the sheep going the way the sheep are going, and like, no, sorry, I'm not going with the sheep. I'm going to go this direction because that makes more sense, right? Compared to those who just kind of follow in a herd mentality. Can you help understand why that is? What's the difference between the two types of thinking or people? Or
I can't answer it as a simple why question. I can I'll provoke my North American colleagues and friends over there. I think that there's a lot of training, a lot of pattern entrainment in particularly in North America and Western culture to be sheep. I think we're training people like it's the 19th century industrial revolution, and we're training them to operate in a factory and be a cog and be subservient and do as they're told. I think if you go to the education system, you look at some of the rote learning and the expectations that you're going to conform and comply with a funnel of education. And in some cases, we're literally trained to not think for ourselves. We're trained to regurgitate facts and follow a prescription, and people are trained to do it. I remember there was a popular news article, and there was an interview with a woman in North America, and she was saying, I think it was actually an anti-vax challenge, and I think she'd been, she bought into a whole bunch of deep cult beliefs and a range of complete nonsense with QAnon and anti-vax. She was across all these different things, and she'd had something horrendous happen where her close family members had died because they hadn't taken appropriate precautions, and she was regretting this, and she was saying how deeply troubled she was and that she'd been taken along and she hadn't thought for herself. And then she looked back in and said, something like, I wish that God had told me the right answer here and told me which way to go. And there was this deep loop within loop, expecting somebody to provide the answers for her without at any point stepping out and going, hang on a minute, I'm responsible for my choices here. And she was so deeply ingrained, she had no idea that she was in this pattern. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think there's something deeply troubling about what you've said. And I think it goes very deep into education. Michael, I see your hand is up.
I just wanted to make a comment, and then Michael, you hop in. The reason for us as health and safety professionals, I think this is very important to get our hands around, is because we say people have the right to refuse work. We say that, why didn't anybody say that something was going on? We've seen situations in the news where people had known for a long time that something was up, but nobody stepped forward or saying anything. So I do think that this is a critical piece to breaking that in our profession. Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, I think kind of related to that too is, and what triggered my hand to go up initially, because the chat evolved here a little, is the notion of how we lean on others to help us with our sense making, right? So there's a big piece of personal resilience, and I love how you started this talk, Ian, about us taking responsibility when we are feeling stressed, we're feeling burnt out and stuff, right? Like, because those are a lot of that, all the contributing factors are personal choices. But then your story, the second story about how you were caught 300 meters under the Arctic, and I share that because there's some new people who joined, without air, right? And how you manage that, you deeply had to not only trust, but also signal your mate. And if any of those sort of if his or her sense making awareness wasn't peaked at the right time, or their attention or their distance and stuff, it could have been a completely disastrous result. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that this group sensing, right? Especially in critical teams, and I'm sure you work with, do all sorts of interesting work in that. But back to your reason I wanted to ask, back to your story, is how did you get caught 300 meters without air?
It was actually 100 meters.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, 300 feet was in my mind. Okay.
Yeah. Good conversion. It was a system failure. You essentially have a box with a number of tanks, and the way that they were plumbed together was incorrect. There was an error. And I was only on one cylinder and the rest weren't connected. And whilst everyone on the top side thought that I had unlimited air, I didn't. So it was an error, essentially a human error. But there were enough systems in operation, and we'd had enough training that it wasn't a fatal error.
Yeah. It's a beautiful example of resilience, because there was a system failure and such a dangerous environment. Right. I'm sure there was multiple checks and balances, and still with all of the procedural elements that resulted in a situation that could have cost a life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think, that's a good example. I mean, just going into the safety space for a moment. If you're going to go into environments like scuba diving under ice in the Antarctic, you cannot mitigate the risk to zero. You just can't do it. There's just too many things that can go wrong. The systems are complicated, but there's also complex emergent factors. It could be wildlife. It could be a change in the ice. It could be just a simple thing like an O-ring blows and suddenly you've got something happening. So you've got to have resilience. You've got to have redundancy within the system, but you've got to have a good culture where you can learn and have the human interactions. There was no blame in this situation. There was no shouting. There was no carry on afterwards. It was just, hey, thanks, guys. It was great knowing that you were there for me. And these things happen, right? Is there anything that we can do to modify our system to make sure this particular thing doesn't happen again? But you can't mitigate every other future risk. And just following up on something Tamara said, and I think this is really important, it's that ability to be able to share an incident or an event without ramifications so you can learn. And I think that's the biggest problem we have in safety at the moment, is that psychological safety, that ability to share something that has gone wrong to learn from it, is not there in most places. I wrote an article, check out my LinkedIn post of last week. We published an article with the Avalanche Review, and we talk about stop stressing about stress. And we're applying, a mix of resilience and Cynefin into that environment, which is extremely high risk environment. And then, a few days later, an article came out by Drew Hardesty, who's probably one of the world's leading avalanche professionals. And it was a really deeply reflective piece where he was essentially mentoring somebody from an adjacent, ski industry, avalanche control. And this person had gone out and had triggered and got caught in an avalanche. And they wanted to sort of share what had gone on as an opportunity to learn and to alert their company. And Drew said, the environment is that, if you do that, that's part of our contemporary way of thinking about safety. So he really encouraged this guy to share what had happened. The guy shared what had happened and got fired. Right. And Drew was reflecting on this, right? Deeply troubled that as a mentor, as a global lead, he'd given this advice and the guy had lost his job. Right. And I think that in a nutshell hits the biggest problem with safety. You don't have the right systems. You don't have the right expectations of risk. We're so risk avoidant. It's like, you broke the rules, we're going to fire you. Well, hang on, I can't learn anything here. That article's worth reading. And I'll put that out there. I don't know if that's where you were heading.
Well, we're heading to the last 10 minutes of this conversation. I just want to turn back to the book. A lot of the stuff we talked about context, Ian does cover in chapter 6 in context. And Michael, that's where he also introduces the Knevin framework to kind of understand what domain you're in. And based on that, this is the sort of context-specific response that you want to do. So I'll leave that as that. Like I said, devote a whole chapter. There's one real piece that I do want to bring up on this show, and it talks about, you talk about the Everest Pattern. So I thought this is a really cool thing because it's lessons learned that can have a real impact on safety. So can you say a few words about the Everest Pattern?
Yeah, interestingly, one of the things that triggered my interest in resilience, in decision making, and leadership was an experience I had way back in 2010. I was an executive in government. I was in the Antarctic program, and in Australia there was a response to the global financial crisis. The government of the day put billions of dollars into all sorts of programs, and one of those involved roofing insulation, pink bats that go in and keep homes warm. So they put $4 billion into this program, but it wasn't well managed, right? No one covered off on the risk very well. 4 people died. There were over 100 house fires, and it affected the department and the minister and all sorts of things. Now, I went to a conference called Risky Business, and in that conference, they talked all about all sorts of things around governance. And the keynote speaker was an Everest mountaineer called Tim Snape. No relative of mine, but the guy's amazing, right? He gave a fantastic keynote speech at a workshop called Risky Business. Now, in his speech, he showed loads of photos of just some of the most amazing ascents in the world, and not once did he talk about risk. And that really struck me. Here you have the best risk manager on the planet talking to an environment where people clearly don't know how to manage risk. And he doesn't mention risk and has no idea what he's doing to manage risk. And that's where we sort of discovered the unconscious processes that he uses to manage risk. And that's written up in the book. But that stimulated me to start thinking about how do we train people as if they're on Everest? And back to Everest, on the 10th of May, 1996, 8 people died right near the summit of Everest. They'd gone way past their point of no return. They hadn't adjusted to change environment of weather. They hadn't acknowledged that there were too many people crowding the summit bid. There were all sorts of factors that led to a catastrophe on Everest with these people dying. They had sunk cost, right? They'd all invested $50,000, $100,000, months of their time. They told their friends they were going to do it. There's peer pressure, there was competition, there was fame and fortune. There's all sorts of these biases that led people way beyond where they should have gone into the death zone. So we designed a process that allows people to use that kind of sensing and say ahead of time, what sort of signals, what kind of things will I see? How will I use my sense making to pre-position a signal that says, hey, stop right now. Now is your turn. Now you need to turn back. And we can use embodied visualization. We can use our sensing. We can activate our unconscious signals by training them to go, hang on, stop right now. This is now my turnaround point. So this is a training activity, and it relates to what Tim Snape was just doing without knowing what he did. He just did it brilliantly. So we've kind of unpacked that and we've laid it out so all of us can learn from Everest, if you like.
Cool. Right. Okay. Well, your book is just chock full of real personal exercises. I always like that. At the end of a chapter, there's something that you can do and just put resilience into practice here. Is there a couple of favorites that you've got? Because again, you've got 12 chapters and just a ton of stuff in there. Is there anyone you'd like to just mention to us?
Yeah, I live and breathe all of these things, right? Literally all the chapters are a part of my everyday week. The way our family operate, the way that we go on holiday, so much of it is part of my life. I really love embodied visualization, sort of chapter 4 state where we can pre-position. We can think about the future. We can do scenario testing, and we can design our responses ahead of time. I use flow a lot, whether it's mountain biking or skiing or walking or whatever it might be, to access flow. If I've got some tricky challenges, you know, I might be thinking I've got this problem. I'll go sailing and come back, and I'll know what the answers are. Right. So there, and something we came in on, which was the box of chocolates, where we were talking about this idea of you know, life is like a box of chocolates. You know, and I think that's, if I had to encapsulate everything there, it's about how do you have your lifestyle designed the way you'd like it to be. And I think if I was to leave the viewers with one thing, it's that it's really, do take a moment. Life is so precious, right? You think about this less about, oh, I've got to have a balanced lifestyle. You know, people talk about it like it's the scales between work and life. It's not. Think of it as a design process where you can get involved, you can be creative, take responsibility for the shape of your life, for where you place your attention. And if you're placing attention in stuff that doesn't work for you, just stop doing it and go and do something else. You know, have a go, take responsibility, manage your downside risk, integrate your signals, put it all together, and have a lifestyle by design.
And there's your takeaways for today, folks. Right there.
We could continue on this conversation. I think we need a part 2.
Well, we could do a part 2, because I think I only covered about a third of the questions that we had planned. So I really thank you for everybody's comments in there. It just added just a wealth of information and knowledge, and really, really great to do that. So, Ian, we may have to have you back if you don't mind starting your day earlier. Yes.
Yeah, there were 4 or 5 comments in the chat that I thought I should respond to that. There's a good question about emotions there. You know, we should be more curious about emotions. I'll challenge something with that one day. That's a whole nother topic. But that, you know, some good stuff there.
Okay.
I'd like to dive into the difference between those health and safety professionals that are risk adverse and those health and safety professionals that do risk activities like mountain climbing and stuff, like, because I believe we may even do health and safety a little bit differently from one another. That could be an interesting conversation.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, again, thanks everybody for showing up there. And Tamara, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. On behalf of Safepedia, we appreciate, Ian, you coming and doing this, and Gary, for you hosting every single month. We love it. And everybody in the audience, thank you again for joining in and making this possible, because without you, we wouldn't be here. Thank you.
Fantastic. Nice to meet you all.
Thanks, everyone.
I think.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.